Dear students and teachers, good evening. As we all know, this year we celebrate the 15th anniversary of the International Relations undergraduate course here at Universidade de Ribeirão Preto. As part of our special calendar of activities, we're pleased to receive today Dr. Reza Fakhari, who is currently Vice President for the Internationalization and Strategic Initiative and professor at St. Francis College in Brooklyn Heights, New York, and chair of the board of the Amnesty International USA. Dr. Fakhari holds a Ph.D. with honor in international relations from the New York School for Social Research in New York City and has had a long-standing and passionate commitment to promoting and defending human rights. Today, he will present a lecture entitled Current Challenges for Human Rights. After the lecture, we will have a few minutes for discussion. You can send your questions through our Instagram account or Google Forms. Questions can be written both in Portuguese or English, but the discussion will be entirely in English. I'd like to invite Dr. Tamiri Souza to continue this activity.
Thank you so much, Adriano. Dear student and teacher, good night. It's with great pleasure that we begin another edition of Global Learning in the International Relations course, an initiative that seeks to internationalize both the course and our university. We are honored to have the presence of the Director of Amnesty International USA, Professor Reza Fakhari. We really appreciate your presence here, Professor, and availability to be here with us tonight. I'd like to thank Professor Augusto Pérez Filho for organizing this event and his dedication to the field of internationalization. As well, I want to thank the Center of Studies and Research in International Relations and Foreign Trade at the Ribeirão Preto University, especially our interns, Adriano, Bruna, Graziele, and Julia, and their supervisor, Professor Matheus Pereira. This year, 2021, can be considered a very special moment because our International Relations course is completing its 15th anniversary. So today, with this lecture, we can celebrate these dates and honor our history. Furthermore, despite the pandemic moments that we are experiencing, we have been able to organize events of this magnitude and receive distinguished figures such as Professor Fakhari. So I appreciate everyone's presence and I hope we have an excellent event. Professor Matheus.
Good evening, everyone. I won't take much longer the presentations, but I really would like to thank you, Professor Fakhari. It's an honor and a privilege to have you here with us. As I've been saying for our students in the past weeks, it's very good to have the opportunity to hear someone who's not only an academic, someone who's thinking about international issues, but also someone who's working on that, who is dealing with the challenges, the concrete challenges that are faced to the international relations and for different levels of policy, especially in a subject that is so challenging and so hard as are the human rights issues. So I'm very, very happy to have you here tonight. And I also like to thank Professor Augusto, who has been a very good friend of our course, and I hope this is the first time we are working together on a seminar, and I hope this will be the first of a series of very successful events. Thank you very much, and once again, thank you, and enjoy your night. Sorry.
So, Augusto, is it to me now?
Yeah, Augusto, you want to say something?
Yes, I would like to first of all thank Professor Reza for his acceptance to our invitation. It is an honor to have him here, and we are very happy that he kindly accepted to speak to us tonight. I also would like to express my thanks to Professor Matheus for his support, as well as NEPRI's support for this activity. I would like to recognize as well and express my thanks to Professor Tamiris for all her support with the global learning. Global learning is a program designed to foster Unaerp's internationalization and provide to our students, as well as our community, the opportunity to increase multicultural skills, understand better global challenges, and promote diversity. So again, thank you so much, Professor Reza, for coming to speak to us tonight. And I pass the word to Adriano to continue with this activity. Thank you.
Professor Reza, you can start. Thank you so
Can I
much.
start?
Yes.
Thank you very much. You know, I have to tell you that I love Brazil. In 2019, before COVID, I was in Brazil 3 times to attend conferences, to recruit students, and I loved the country each time more. And I have also got a good number of Brazilian students at St. Francis College who are high achievers and absolutely wonderful. So I'm delighted to be with you tonight. I hope the way I speak, it is slow enough and understandable. I was impressed by the proficiency of English in all of you. So I'm hoping that you can understand me well. I want this to be a bit interactive, so you can interrupt me to ask questions. You don't have to wait till the end. That's how I hold my classes, in a seminar-like interactive. And I may ask you also questions as I present. So this is a very interesting time for human rights globally. There are a lot of challenges. As you know, human rights do not occur in a vacuum. There's a context to them, and the context is the geopolitics, global geopolitics, what is happening among great powers. And we don't have a defined global order yet. I mean, during the Cold War, US and former Soviet Union were 2 superpowers. You know, in the last couple of decades, you know, US has been almost the only superpower, but that picture is changing with the emergence of China. So there's a lot of what I call turbulence in international politics, which shapes human rights, affects human rights, and it has affected human rights adversely, negatively in the past, I would say 16 years. Let me just show you, you know, graphically what I mean. Augusto, can you go to the next slide? The end of human rights. This FP is a prestigious magazine, foreign policy magazine in the US, and that was the cover of that magazine in April of 2018. This is essentially 1 year into Trump administration in America, because Trump came to power in January of 2017. This is about 1 year, a couple of months later. And, you know, if you visualize human rights being that bird, and you can see the shots, assaults against human rights. Go to the next slide, please. So here is pretty much talking about letting go, letting the American leadership, world leadership goal. Trump, America, and the world pretty much abdicating the leadership that America had exercised since World War II. Next slide, please. By the way, hold on. This is foreign affairs. The other one was foreign policy. Foreign Affairs is the most prestigious journal of international relations published by Council on Foreign Relations in New York. It's highly respected. It's an establishment journal. Next one. That is Trump's foreign policy, America's foreign policy as signified by what he's doing. That's the cover of The Economist magazine from England, which is very much conservative or mainstream, graphically showing the kind of unbalance in American foreign policy. Next one. That was in go back, Augusta. That was in June of 2018, so a few months later. Next one, please. Who will run the world? That is in January, February of 2019. Will it be US? Will it be China? What kind of global order? That is what I was talking about a minute ago regarding the uncertainty about this great power competition. Will China emerge as the other superpower, or what? We'll discuss that. Next one, please. Oh, will Trump clean all of this up? That's from January 2021 of The Economist magazine. After Biden, this is Biden that you see. Will Biden clean up the mess that Trump left behind? Will he reassert American leadership, multilateral democracy, respect for human rights, join important treaties and organizations like World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Treaty, which happened, by the way, So go to the next one. And even with Biden as the president of America, you have an America that is highly polarized between Democrats, Republican, conservatives, liberal. You have to live here to feel it, will Biden be able to be effective in such a divided nation? Even though Trump is gone, Trumpism still exists. He has got his base, which is about, I would say, 35% of American electorate. And so that's a big challenge. And they are the ones that support his undemocratic ways. Next slide, please. And this one is, last one, I want to put what is happening in terms of erosion of human rights and decline of democracy in a globalization context. This is from Foreign Policy magazine again, asking, are we seeing the end of globalization, especially with COVID-19? And my argument is going to be no, you are not going to see it, but we have got big problems with the kind of globalization that we have had since its inception, let's say, beginning with 1990, after the Cold War ended. And I'll explain how globalization has fueled or given rise to the kind of undemocratic trends and tendencies that we are witnessing in the world. If you'd be kind enough to go to the next slide, Augusto. This is from Freedom House. You have this PowerPoint that Augusto will share with you, and then the link for Freedom House is, I believe, in the next slide. Essentially, what the map shows to you is green are free countries. The tan ones are the ones that are partly or partially free, and the ones that are in purple are not free. So you see in the Americas, you see Canada, US free. And if you go to the next slide, Augusto, and you see Brazil, Argentina, Chile are seen as pretty much free. But then when you go to countries such as Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Mexico, Cuba, Haiti are partially free, but you do see here Belize, in Central America as being free. So the majority, almost the majority of the world is not free in purple or partially free. Now, if you go to the next slide, you see change in the freedom score. It tells you how the countries that you are seeing from 2009 to 2020, how there has been reversal in the degree of freedom in this country. Less free is dark red. Look at America, less free. Look at India, less free. Look at here, I believe this is Belarus, less free. And when you come down, if you compare with the map that I just showed to you, Brazil has also become less free. The trend has gone to becoming less free. Actually, go to the next slide. Now you can see, except for Chile, and I believe that's Bolivia. Am I correct? The two green ones. Then you're seeing the trend of going authoritarian, undemocratic since 2009 to 2020 has affected South America to a great extent. So essentially what Freedom House is saying that since 2005, for 16 years, we are 2021 now, you have seen consecutive decline in global freedom and therefore democracy and therefore human rights. And that trend, you could say in the US with Biden administration election, that trend has been arrested. And we shall see, if this is reversed and America becomes the consolidated, fully democratic country that it was. What Trump did is he pretty much demolished institutions, norms, rule of law, respect for international institution, and also domestically the politics of hate, discrimination, prejudice. So it really, the civil society in America became very toxic and sick. It has to come back. American polity is not healthy. Go to the next one, please. So why do we have decline of democracy and human rights globally? One is backlash to an unjust and undemocratic globalization process. You know, I don't know how many of you have read the book by Thomas Friedman, The Lexus and Olive Tree. This book was pretty much published in the year, I believe, 2000. Thomas Friedman, who's a columnist for New York Times, highly influential, he coined the term globalization. He brought it into main currency. He was an enthusiast for globalization, beating his chest for globalization, saying that we should let the electronic herd, those who control capital, just have unfettered access to every country in the world after the Cold War ended. And all countries in the world should plug into process of globalization and obey by the neoliberal rules of capitalism, which was essentially wear that straitjacket, those set of rules, and you'll prosper. That was his advice as the world was going more and more interdependent, integrated, and borders were disappearing, distance was disappearing. But what is interesting, and I want to tell this to our students, every time you read a book, look for contradictions. Every great writer, theorist, philosopher has a contradiction. My great professor, whom you probably know if you're in international relations, was Hans J. Morgenthau. Hans J. Morgenthau was the father of realist school of thought. He was my professor. And when you read his book, Politics Among Nations, The Struggle for Power and Peace, in the beginning, he essentially says, well, this is jungle. This is, you know, the desire for power is unending. It cannot cease till we die. And he sees a Hobbesian world of constant struggle among individuals and especially among nations. So the guiding principle for him, the guiding concept is power, the guiding principle is national interest expressed in terms of power, balance of power, and continual struggle on the international scene. And he then discusses how we can achieve permanent peace. So here you have this great theorist of international relations. In the beginning says everything is about power. Nations will not give up their power. Towards the end of his book, he makes a plea that we should form a global community as a foundation for a world state. Because when he was writing, nuclear arms race was almost destroying civilization. He wanted those who had nuclear weapons give up that power to a supra state and for the world to get rid of nuclear weapons. And the way he said you could do that is if you could establish a world state, a world government. Here you have a realist becoming an idealist in the end. That's the beauty of Morgenthau. I did a review of his book that I'll send to Augusto. It's probably the only review of Morgenthau that I have seen that shows this contradiction, this beautiful realism, idealism of Morgenthau. And what is interesting, this is a man that influences Gorbachev, who comes to power in the former Soviet Union and totally transforms the Soviet Union in that kind of idealist direction. Gorbachev was not an idealist. He didn't mind giving up Eastern Europe. He wanted to get rid of nuclear weapons. So you can see the influence of a philosopher on a statesman. So going back to Thomas Friedman, the Lexus and Olive Tree, Understanding Globalization, his book. So he's very excited about globalization, and that's the year 2000. Chapter 14 says, oh, but watch out. You better not be a globalizer without being a social democrat. What are you talking about? He essentially is saying, if you globalize and a lot of people are left out, he calls them turtles, they are going to become the backlash against the process of globalization. The poor, those who lose their job because their jobs are sent to low-wage countries, that's what happened to America. A lot of those industries left and went to China, East Asia, or in the global south, and the middle-class Americans that had those jobs lost them. He says, not only that, but those left-outs, the poor, can also become terrorists because they don't have anything to look for. So watch out. So globalization has a heart, is sustainable, it is just, it is democratic. He writes that in the year 2000. And that process has come, the process of globalization took off with a vengeance, with that turbo capitalism. And it is only recently, especially after 2008 global depression, that it is correcting itself. But the consequences has been the revolt of the left-outs against the perceived elites. So in America, essentially, the Trump base is the backlash base. These are, Trump said, Trump hated globalization, global elite. He didn't want to talk about global interdependence, which is the essence of globalization, but about sovereign independence of America. America didn't want to be interdependent with anybody. America first, America alone. And that is, you know, that is what you saw during his presidency. And then if you have the leader of the free world going that way, then other dictators are going to emerge. So Putin goes more undemocratic in Russia. India under, you know, Modi becomes authoritarian. You get that in Hungary, you get that in Poland, you get in some Western European countries. So we have had what I would argue, my friends, a rise of emergence of illiberal authoritarian populism, even when some people, leaders are elected democratically. And excuse me, I have to give you an example of your country too. Even in Brazil, they can be elected democratically, but rule illiberally and undemocratically. So I would put also your president in that trend, and please feel free to disagree with me on that. I'm a scholar and pretty much argue based on facts, and that is, you know, what unfortunately we are seeing. And what happens is that in this kind of environment, you get demagogic leaders who exploit the fears of people, their prejudices, anti-immigrant prejudices, and hate speech, and to keep themselves in power and to get re-elected. And that, unfortunately, has affected fully consolidated democracies in the US, in India, and in Brazil, and in some other countries like not fully democratic Philippines, but Duarte, has been one of those demagogic autocrats. So that is what you're saying. They, as undemocratic leaders come to power, human rights suffer, democracy suffers, and civil society suffers. The context of all of that is also the global power struggle. So you have globalization that has been unjust, undemocratic, benefiting the very few, maybe even less than 1% of those who are the lords of globalization. But in terms of, and leaving behind masses of people that are not benefiting from globalization. But geopolitically, the great power struggle also have intensified authoritarian trend. So you have elections in the US that Russia interferes. And, and does, manipulation of social media, gets documents, releases them, and interferes. China does that, interference as well. So in order to discredit more democracy, China and Russia have done everything to undermine democracy in Western Europe and in the US. So the great power struggle has intensified this authoritarian trend. So what you're seeing now in America is a lot of discussion of decline of America's global leadership and emergence of China as a contender, perhaps as another superpower. I have to tell you something interesting before we go on. Again, that speaks to the complexity of the world we are. So you have the democratic path that has been pretty much this kind of liberal democracy path exemplified by the US. And then you have the Chinese path, which is, one party authoritarian government that actually led China out of sweatshop into a middle class and increasingly affluent country. China is ever conscious to be a player in the game of globalization, a full participant, and it is also conscious not to lose political power, to keep Chinese going, to maintain control. So last week in the Financial Times, there is an article that the premier of China is forcing billionaires, big companies, they should do redistribution of wealth. They shouldn't accumulate so much wealth to become billionaires. You may have heard that in the news. His new platform for the party is that more wealth has to be redistributed downward. They are doing that in order to make China a kind of more egalitarian, so the inequity of globalization does not create a backlash in China against the ruling elite and the communist leaders or the ruling elite. It was fascinating to read that, to see how even a communist dictatorial nation is ever conscious of making sure that there aren't too many left outs, and they can do this remedy to maintain the leadership. Let's go to the next slide, Augusto. So, for the students and the faculty, I don't know how much you know about globalization. I liken globalization to Industrial Revolution. It changed everything. The beginning of it was really with Thatcher and Reagan in the late 1970s. It takes off during the Reagan administration with all the deregulation. And then when Clinton comes to power, he becomes Mr. Globalization. The Cold War has ended. Globalization takes off in a neoliberal fashion. And it is at that time, 1997, that my favorite author, William Greider, in his book, One Word, Ready or Not, he describes globalization as a wondrous, free-running process that is reordering the world, resulting in an economic system of interdependence designed to ignore the prerogative of nations, even the most powerful ones. He argues that such interdependence requires a new global consciousness, one accepting of the idea that humanity is now in a shared enterprise. I suggest actually, a new global humanism in which the dignity of every human being is indivisible from that of any other. So Greider essentially saying with globalization, you have got integration, you have got interdependence, you're all in one boat, in one boat, you're all in this, shared enterprise of humanity. Therefore, everyone's humanity and dignity counts, and it is indivisible. That's very interesting. Then you have the UN Alliance of Civilization using the term one global humanity. That's what we should be aiming for. Now, that has implications, professors and students. So if that is the case, what kind of education should we provide to students? Augusta, can you give me a time, how much time I have?
Professor Mateus, is there how much time longer? You feel free to go ahead, Professor.
You have as much time as you want to. It's been amazing to hear you. So keep going.
Okay, I want to be considerate of your obligation. So here you have Greider saying we need a new global humanism. The UN Alliance of Civilization saying one global humanity. Go to next slide, please. So here is the UN Alliance of Civilization, the High Representative, Mr. Miguel Moratinos, just recently talking about the importance of education for global citizenship in the age of COVID-19. Look at how much what he's saying aligns with what Greider was saying in his book, One Word, Ready or Not. He says that amid this pandemic, global citizenship education is even more relevant than ever before, as we saw the surge in stigma, polarization, racism, and hate speech against vulnerable communities. This is important. He's saying traditional education, as we have been providing to students, is not good enough. While traditional education focuses on improving literacy and facilitating the transmission of knowledge and skills from one generation to the next remain vital, there is a growing need for transformative education, such as global citizenship education, which nurtures shared values and respect for diversity. Traditional education and transformative education complement each other. They must go with each other. Go to the next slide, please. And that is what we are trying to do in my college by this program that we have, Human Rights and Global Citizenship. So essentially, we are saying that our globally interconnected world requires a new paradigm of enrich and engage education to develop knowledge, skills, and capacities in our students to thrive as global citizens and professionals. This is actually my statement on SFC International website. Moreover, SFC thinks that we understand that to be successful, our students must have a deep understanding of global citizenship. Furthermore, human rights education is a core element in global citizenship education. Therefore, we have constructed a human rights-based framework for global citizenship education. So we have got this human rights and global citizenship certificate that will ideally impact all SFC students by helping the students develop a sense of purpose and key capacities such as global understanding, empathy, compassion, solidarity, recognizing and combating discrimination and social injustice, and personal agency. Give them all that education, let them be agents of change. Find personal agency. Next slide, please. And this is really, my thinking is influenced. In international relations, I was influenced by Hans Morgenthau. In this philosophy, I'm influenced by Martha Nussbaum, a philosopher at the University of Chicago, who says what kind of education you need to advance global humanism. And she says you need an education based on the idea of an inclusive global citizenship and on the possibilities of compassionate imagination that has the potential to transcend divisions created by distance, cultural difference, and mistrust. Nussbaum suggests 3 crucial capacities of responsible, globally minded citizenry in a pluralistic democracy. First is critical thinking. Students have to be critical thinkers. Professors need to train them to be critical thinkers. The second thing is the ability to bridge and understand different cultures and religions. And the third one, and that is the most important, ability to imagine the situation of others and sympathize actively with them. Just today, you have thousands of people in Kabul, Afghanistan, wanting to leave. They helped American soldiers, American diplomats, while the occupation occurred in Afghanistan. They are in danger. They want to leave. And what happens today? You have ISIS, who is opposed to Taliban. So Taliban itself is massively reactionary. I don't even call them Muslims because they are so out of the way. I myself was brought up as a Muslim. I know what Islam is. What they are practicing is a grotesque cultural, traditional interpretation of Islam that has no place in our common understanding of Islam. So, and then you get ISIS, that are another bunch of crazies. So they come and plant the bomb to kill Taliban, but more importantly, Afghans and American soldiers. Now, your students, even before this bombing, when they see these people wanting to get out because they don't want to get killed, they want a future for their students, they are standing in sewage in front of the airport. That you need to imagine their situation and sympathize actively with them. what I have been doing, so I have the whole leadership of Khatib University in Afghanistan that wants to get out. A private university that I have a relationship with, or the chancellor, everyone wants to get out because they have been threatened by Taliban. And then I have my student Mustafa, whose father was a military officer and his sister was a human rights activist. He wants to get the family out. So I was working with the government of Spain, working with the government of Ukraine, if you can get them on the plane to get them out, and then the bombing occurs. It stops. 2 nights we have been working on it, didn't happen. Next slide, Augusta. So what is the definition of human rights? We talk about human rights. What is the definition? Human rights really provides you the framework for a global roadmap for dignity, freedom, and equality of every individual everywhere. The UN defines human rights as rights inherent, enshrined to all human beings, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights include the right to life and liberty, freedom from slavery and torture, freedom of opinion and expression, the right to work and education, and many more. Everyone is entitled to these rights without discrimination. And according to my organization, Amnesty International, human rights are universal and inalienable, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Human rights is not just political speech. Human rights are also socio-economic rights. Human rights are rights to a good climate that doesn't devastate us constantly with this kind of fluctuation. Human rights also is equity in distributing vaccines globally. So, so the rich countries do not have surplus of vaccine, and the global south is dying, and more is getting sick and doesn't have enough vaccine. So Amnesty is advocating for equity in the recovery from COVID-19. Next slide, please. So, the origin of human rights is really Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the UN in 1948, 3 years after the founding of the UN. Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, and it outlines 30 basic rights and freedoms that belong to all of us, that nobody can take away from us. The rights that were included continue to form the basis for international human rights law. So those of you who are going into law, international law or humanitarian law, this is really the best human rights law we have, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it is a living document, and it is a globally agreed document that is referred constantly, and that marked out all humans as being free and equal, regardless of sex, color, creed, religion, or other characteristics. Next slide, please. So Amnesty honors that document, and we are a global movement of more than 10 million people, over 150 countries and territories, who campaign for a world where human rights are enjoyed by all. And Universal Declaration is the foundation stone of rights that Amnesty International and its 10 million strong power base fight for day in, day out. More than 50 years since it started, the global movement continues to take action and campaign for justice, freedom, truth, and dignity wherever it has been denied. Next slide, please. So in terms of human rights program at St. Francis College, and we are going to share more of that with you and invite your faculty and your students to participate online, because some of these courses are going to be online when we offer them, and either in a component or in the whole course, and for us to have some collaboration on it. I've already sent some of this material to Augusto, but we want to also create a short-term certificate that hopefully post-COVID, some of your students can come and take it in New York City, and hopefully our students can come to Brazil and take short-term programming in your university. So what we have done with human rights at San Francisco College, I have recruited stellar scholars from the academy, from the corporate sector, and from community. So the first course that you see, Understanding Human Rights, which we offered, 71 students took it the first time. This is the foundation course. Then we look at human rights locally, human rights in New York City, fighting for human justice. So executive director of a community organization, a young African-American director, will teach that course with me. The concept is human development. You just don't give to the poor, you develop them as human development and then empower them for entrepreneurship and then achieve human justice. Third one is a course it's by Fernando Blanco, originally from Chile, Challenges to Democracy and Human Rights in Latin America. He's at Bucknell University, and Augusto has met him. And then I replicate that course for Challenges to Democracy and Human Rights in the Middle East. I do that with my colleague Ken Mayers. Then we go to the corporate sector person, Luna Corbetta, originally from Spain. She's at Price Waterhouse Cooper, Business and DEI. DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's so big in America now. The human rights lens of business. She's going to be teaching that course. But you notice for every course, I'm saying when it is being offered. Spring. We don't know yet for the Middle East course, but the spring for Luna's course. Next slide. And then you get another corporate person who's at Columbia University now, Human Rights, Sustainability, and Global Finance. And Aniket is from Columbia University Center on Sustainable Investment. So he'll be doing that next fall. And then I'm developing with Ken the course on international human rights and humanitarian law. And the next one is by an expert journalist on human trafficking, gender, and social impact. And finally, we come all the knowledge that the students got, how do you put it to action? Human rights activism, advocacy, and change. And that one is by Hakeem Williams from Gettysburg College. All of these people are fellows, plus me and Ken developing these in partnership with Amnesty International and in partnership with Global Citizenship Alliance in Salzburg, Austria. So we have really connected with the best organizations to do human rights and global citizenship. Next one, please. Conclusion. Conclusion is to recommendation to the professors that educating the students for inclusive global citizenship is essential for their success in the 21st century. And to the students, I would say, this is not an add-on or luxury. Human rights and global citizenship education should be seen as integral to your education, woven into a new paradigm of enrich and engage education for our highly interdependent and globalized world. And moreover, to our students, the future of our global order depends on education of our students for productive democratic citizenship, global awareness and engagement, and respect for dignity and universal human rights of every human being. If they don't get it while they are in the college with you, they are not going to get it. These are the precious years that the teachers have to teach and the students need to learn. And you become, if you have a global perspective, if you feel a sense of social responsibility for people all over the world, and you're democratic minded, it makes you a much better person. It makes you a leader. It opens up better careers for you. You can get elected to the government. You can stop this trend of authoritarianism. Take your country back to democracy. Contribute to civil society. So we can do the traditional education, but it is imperative now that we do human rights and global citizenship education. And that is my conclusion, and I would be more than happy to take your questions, and thank you for bearing with me for my lengthy presentation.
Thank you so much, Professor Reza. We are all thrilled and honored with your presentation. I believe we do have questions now, Professor Mateus.
Yes, I'm going to say some
Professor
questions,
Camille,
and then
sorry.
Professor Mateus is going to say something.
Okay.
So just to begin, I'd like to say thank you for your lecture, Professor. It was very enlightened. It was so great to hear about the human rights and their connections with international relations. I believe that all my students know Morgenthau, and we were so delighted to hear your experience with him. So thank you so much. Professor Laura here teaches international relation theory. So just talking like now our students can see these connections and this thesis of Morgenthau. So thank you so much. It was very interesting. And I'm sure that our students are very keen to understand, and they developed their knowledge here with your lecture. So thank you so much. And I can say for myself, I really like to see the course of the St. Francis College, and I'm going to talk with our students about that. So thank you for showing to us. So we have two questions just to begin, and then we can go to another round, if you don't mind, just to go slowly. The first one is, how does the crisis of democratic pose an additional challenge to human rights promotion? And the second one is, how long will it take to fully restore the damage that Trump's government has caused in human rights, but not just in USA, but around the world, and especially if you have some way to change the situation that's so terrifying now? That's
very interesting question. I understood the second one fully. The first one, can you repeat the first part for me?
Sure. How does the crisis of democracy pose an additional challenge to human rights promotion? We can say that we have a democratic crisis, so how does connection with human rights and how we can talk about it?
Well, great. I love the questions. Human rights is respected when you have a democratic system. The more democracy you have, the more you observe human rights. The elected leaders know the boundaries. The rule of law is respected. Hate speech, discrimination, all of that is pretty much controlled or punished. So what we have seen, so here you have a country, US, which is the leader in the world. If you remember Morgenthau, again, this is another interesting thing about him. He said, as much as he was interested in power, he said that the power of a nation is not indicated by the number of nuclear weapons or military troops or hard power that it has, but by the image it projects to the rest of the world. That's soft power. America was excellent in soft power. It was that shining example. By practicing human rights at home, by being faithful to its Declaration of Independence, which is a similar document to Universal Declaration of Independence, because it promises all those freedoms and all of those things. That image was critically important to promote human rights globally. Because America, first of all, America, in terms of, selling military hardware, they wouldn't sell to a country that wasn't certified for human rights. In terms, if there was grotesque violation of human rights like genocide, they would sanction it, like they did with Serbia or some other countries. That image went down the drain with Trump. It destroyed. I mean, in terms of the image, it overnight, America became an outlaw state. Even a treaty that was negotiated with my native country of Iran to control the nuclear weapons there. And that treaty was signed by Security Council members in the UN. It was an international treaty that you couldn't break unilaterally. Trump said, the hell with it, broke. Pulled out of the, climate treaty and, out of all kinds of human rights bodies. So that created a crisis of democracy in America and then also globally, because America could not lecture to China anymore about its treatment of Hong Kong or what it wants to do to China. It couldn't lecture Duarte in Philippines. It couldn't lecture Putin. So what happened is, in a democracy, there has to be guardrails. You have to have a process that you don't get demagogic, crazy people elected as president or to Congress or Senate. That guardrails of democracy collapsed with Trump. A major political party, Republican Party, nominated him. And he won the presidency and then wreaked havoc. That, pretty much produced the kind of crisis for human rights. Now, the second part, oh my God, I forgot the second part. Remind me, just give me one hint.
The second question, Professor.
Yeah.
Yes. How long will it take to fully restore the damage of Trump's administration?
A long time.
Yes.
So I think what Biden has done is to, first of all, diplomacy is back in American foreign policy. you know. You also have someone at the head of CIA, Bill Burns, who was the second person in charge of diplomacy during the Obama's administration. He was Undersecretary of State. It is his book that I'm using for my diplomacy class this fall. So he is the head of CIA. That means CIA cannot do torturous things, crazy things. So CIA is now under the leadership of a wise statesman. But as I mentioned to you, domestically, the challenge to democracy, human rights continues. It is a disunited nation. And Biden is helping, doing a lot. The Afghanistan crisis is going to damage him. It's going to distract from what he wanted to do. What Biden is doing, which is very interesting, Professor, is the bills that he passed, the $1.3 trillion infrastructure bill, and now the other bill, $3.4 trillion. If you study it, it deals with all aspects of human rights. It deals with child care. It deals with maintenance, floor for poverty. So what he did with this bill, they actually reduced poverty drastically in America. The bonuses and unemployment that were given during the COVID-19. So the bill provides for free education in community colleges, forgiveness of student loans for those who do public service. It creates massive number of jobs. So in the age of globalization, where workers lost their jobs, let's say in steel industry or manufacturing, they can have these good paying jobs. So it is building the foundation for human rights, addressing substantive human rights, socioeconomic rights. It also deals with climate beautifully. Cars going electric, reducing emission. So the question is, there's that thin thread control of the House of Representatives and Senate. If that flips in November of 2022, then he will not be able to pass much legislation because the Republicans would veto everything. So you have a democratic government, you have a good president who has now the Senate 50-50 and the House of Representatives by a dozen. If Trump continues to go on, campaign and invigorate his base, and if there are disappointments in Biden, you may see the two houses turn, and then there's going to be further decline of America and democracy and human rights. So, but if he is successful, then I think the example comes back. You already are saying Economist magazine takes surveys of how people in other countries view America. So when Trump was living, the rate that was positively viewing America was like 11%. With Biden coming to power, it has gone above 50%. Under Obama administration, the perception of America was positive, almost 85-90%. That is important because then people pay attention to your soft power. But you know something, there's so much the elected leaders can do. It is the civil society. It is us educating ourselves as democratically educated citizens, active, participating, educating our neighbors, our family, so they are informed. That is how you don't get these demagogues elected. So the work has to be at the grassroots level. That's what we are doing at Amnesty, informing our 10 million people about human rights and activating them to work in their communities so that we do not lose these elections to reactionary elements. Did I answer your question, Professor? Great.
Yes, Professor, thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry?
Go ahead.
No, I'm glad you mentioned the congressional issue, because even now that we have a Democratic Congress, for instance, Senator Mark Rubio is holding up a lot of State Department nominations. So, in fact, there are a lot of positions in State Department who are currently vacant, not because the government hasn't indicated someone, but because the Senate is not voting to approve or not those names. So it's a very important issue always. It's something that I always like to stress with our students. The role of the Congress in the US foreign policy is extremely important, even more important than it is here or in a lot of Latin American countries. And I also would like to add, Professor, that we might have to invite you again to share your experience of being Professor Morgenthau's student. I was very interested in hearing about that. But now I do have a serious question about the lecture. I think from the beginning, the restoration of human rights in the US foreign policy was a key issue for the Biden administration.
Yes.
You can see that on this course. You can see that on the names of the people that have been nominated for key positions, like Ambassador Samantha Power for USAID and many other names. But at the same time, I do have a feeling that there is the Trumpism, if you can call there's such a thing as Trumpism, is still very strong in American society. And my question is, how do you think that President Biden can balance this gap between his willingness to act and to engage the country in the human rights promotion and treaties, international organizations, and all the means that we have to promote human rights with this domestic agenda, that this domestic need to convince and to deal with extremely divided society. And I say that because when I heard the speech he gave after this disaster in Afghanistan, in a lot of moments, it seems to me that I was hearing America first, even though he was not saying that, but there was some echoes of America first in his speech. So I'd like to hear about that.
See, I don't think it is America first in the sickening way that Trump did. I think, Professor, what's happening here is that you had a war in Afghanistan. The estimate is anywhere from $1 to $2 trillion in treasure was wasted there, with about 2,400, no more, because more American soldiers were killed today, lives lost. Probably millions of Afghans lost their life. Biden wanted to get out of Afghanistan because he needs the money domestically for his investments, and he wanted to end those forever wars because he came to a realization that you cannot impose democracy on cultures that on people that are not conducive to democracy. Democracy requires preconditions. You know, I did my dissertation on Gorbachev and how he emerged and how he was changing the former Soviet Union. And I said, what it requires for him to transition to democracy, what are the preconditions? You know, civil society, rule of law, you know, all the rest. And he was pretty much, you know, observing all of that, but he needed more time. It takes a generation or two before people develop habits of democratic citizenship, civil society is in place, and you have checks and balances. He didn't have time, and therefore, so when you go to Afghanistan, yes, in 20 years, they were able to get more girls, more women, education, more respect for human rights in a sense, you know, more economic development, but at what cost? A lot of lives lost. So the realization came that we did some good, we failed. Let's get out. And I, you know, Afghanistan is next to my native country, and I'm heartbroken. What's going to happen with Taliban and now with ISIS? So you could have a counterfactual, a what if US didn't go there, if they went in there after 2001 World Trade attack and just removed Taliban and killed bin Laden and then got out, didn't stay. So I have to bring one other element here in terms of domestic picture. And that is America, the demographics of America, demographics meaning the composition of the population, is moving from white majority to the polarity of minorities become majority. That means by the year 2045 is the estimate that the whites would be less than 50% in America. That is producing incredible anxiety among whites in America. They don't want immigrants. You remember Trump saying we don't want, you know, people of color. He even called up immigrants from Africa coming from shithole countries, and he disrespected immigrants coming from Haiti. They don't want. They want the kind of white dominance to continue. You know, Stephen Miller, who was the immigration advisor to Trump, said that explicitly. Even just now, when we were trying to get Afghan refugees out to bring them here, he said, no, don't bring these foreign people. They are Muslim, they are uneducated, they become a burden. So there is this deep anxiety, and that fear, that anxiety pushes people to the Trump base because he pretty much wants to maintain the white dominance. So it is it's a tough problem for Biden. On the one hand, he wants to have respect human rights, have a good heart, and have the immigrants humanely seek asylum and refuge in America. On the other hand, that could cost him Congress, Senate, and even a second term for presidency. So the polarization that you see in America is not only because of consequences of globalization, it is also because of changing demographics. So you are right, you have to pay attention to the Congress and some of those appointments have to be by 60 senators. It's not a simple majority. 60 of them have to vote, and he doesn't have it. He has 50 plus the vice president that can break the tie.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting point if you think that he's a man of the Senate. He spent almost his entire political career in the Senate. So, at least for me, it seems to be a challenge that can say a lot about his ability to government and to deal with the forces in the Senate. But we do have more questions. If you want to make a comment about it,
can I just answer that question, because I think you're raising a good point, my friend. His experience in the Senate would have counted a lot if you were dealing with rational opposition that respected rule of law, that respected. They don't. Everything is for political gain, how they can regain power. And if you compare America now versus Reagan time, when Reagan came to power, we said, oh my God, America has moved so much to the right. If Reagan was alive today, he would be at the center. We have moved so much to the right. It is crazy, irrational. You can't deal with irrational people. Look at this, my friend. Look at COVID thing. You have southern states. COVID is killing their people. Still, the governors are saying no mask mandate. They are not requiring the residents to become vaccinated to return to work, to schools. Florida, Texas, Louisiana. So there is a close correlation between good government, good governance, good leaders, and containment of COVID coronavirus. Look at your country. If you had, if you had a competent, rational government that respected science and didn't fire the health minister, a country that had such a nice health system, you were pioneers in vaccination, and then you get the second highest incidence of COVID in the world after America. Governance, good governance, accountable government, competence equals, conquering the virus and bringing your country back. So in a sense, the more democratic government, the more respect for human rights, the more you can control virus and be equitable in getting people vaccinated and treated. Sorry, go ahead with your question.
No, it's fine. And actually, I was going to ask you about, as a foreign observer, how do you see the current state of Brazilian foreign policy regarding human rights? Because during your presentation, you recalled some instruments, some legal instruments and treaties that had a very important contribution from Brazil. And right now, we do see a very challenging, to say the least, situation for the human rights promotion here. And we have a question for a student who'd like to know your thoughts on how do you see the role of China in promoting human rights. So two very tricky and hard questions.
Yeah.
But
with regard to Brazil, I'm going to send to Augusto a presentation that was made to Amnesty board by Erica, who is the director of Amnesty Americas. She provides the general picture of human rights in all of Latin America, South America, Middle America, the Caribbean, and then also on Brazil. I'll send that PowerPoint, that report, because it is very informative and it's usable for your classes as well. It really, 3 times in Brazil, I came to know people in Brazil. I have some families that I know, families of my students, and I have a whole bunch of students here. And it just doesn't make sense to have your Trump there. It just doesn't make sense. And was it corruption that, helped your current president to get elected? Or was it some kind of, phenomenon similar to the U.S. Politics of hate speech, and all of that? It's really difficult for me to diagnose because I don't have enough, knowledge. But one hopes that in the next election, which I believe is in 1 year, I know Lula is running, but I'm hoping that more contenders would come. And it seems that the popularity of this president is very low.
If we are lucky, there will be elections next year.
Yeah, that's what I said. If elections are held, we almost had a coup d'état in America on January 6th. That is the extent of the decline of democracy in America, that you actually had an elected president, almost with a deaf Senate and House of Representatives, the Republicans, pretty much allowing for the coup to occur. It's just unbelievable in a democracy for this to happen. Going to China, it's very interesting. So here you have China emerging economically almost as a superpower. In a few years, its GDP is going to be more than US. It has got 1.45 billion population. And the population is getting more and more educated. A good number of them come abroad to get educated. Billionaires are emerging. Cities are built overnight there, in China. So the interesting question is, and I dealt with that in my dissertation. So when Gorbachev came to power, he said that Russians needed democracy like air to breathe. Therefore, glasnost, which was the opening. So he wanted to give glasnost, then perestroika, which was economic restructuring, and then followed by new political thinking in international relations that transformed the foreign policy. But glasnost, democracy, was first. He said that if you give democracy freedom, then they can become innovative, because Russians are the most educated people in the world, and then they become entrepreneurs, and Soviet economy can take off. Some said that was his mistake. By glasnost, he allowed Yeltsin to pull the rug under him. That question applies to China. For how long can you have an economic development political development that is here? The dissonance. How long the Chinese who become middle class, affluent, are going to tolerate not to have free access to the internet, not free access to speech, not much freedom, not as much freedom of movement, no democracy, phony elections, which is one political. How long can that continue without having some form of liberalization, some form of introduction of democracy? I think they are avoiding that by trying to redistribute wealth, as I mentioned, which is very, very interesting. Because when people are not doing well economically, they either become discontent and demonstrate, or they, like in America, they become they follow, illiberal leaders. It seems to me that you are looking. There's a contradiction here. China cannot pick up a fight with the U.S. because they are so integrated in the global economy that even today is led by the US. So, and they have so much money invested in the US, in the treasury bills and other investment, maybe as much as $3, $4, $5 trillion. So, on the one hand, economically, they are involved in globalization, totally integrated with the US. If I were to look at where the things that I'm wearing in my house, where they are made, almost 90% is made in China. Okay, so they rely so much on exports. If they come and play geopolitical games, if they become militarily aggressive, if they grab Taiwan, if they assert themselves in South China Sea, if they pick a fight with India, if they become really, really brutal with regard to Uyghurs, the Muslims in the western part, all of that can backfire. You can have sanctions against them. You can have perhaps even expelling them from World Trade Organization. So I think what China would do, they would strive to be militarily strong and show their flag, but not engage in a confrontation with the US. It would be cold peace, not Cold War, cold peace. And what they are doing, and then what they would do, they would do soft power. They would invest in the Silk Road, the Belt, and the investment that they have made in the infrastructure, so they can connect China with Europe, Belt and Road, whatever they call that. That has extended to Latin America. They have presence in Brazil. When I was in the hotel in Brazil, I saw a number of Chinese there. My best friend, Andre, had a phone that was made in China. What is that? Huawei, that fancy phone. You can get that in the US, but but it is all over in Brazil, and they are leader of 5G. So I would say this, that they would continue to build their military power, but to simply show that militarily they can be equal to the US, but they would not engage in war and confrontation with the US, because that would destroy the process of globalization. And then if they are not in that process, people would rise up, because you can't shut up people for, if they don't have what you call it, prosperity or getting rich. So, but that dissonance has to be solved one day, unless the Chinese are going to be happy being under a dictatorship and getting rich. And I don't think the more education you get, the more you travel, the more you're going to resist living under those kind of restrictive conditions. I hope I answer your question. That is, I watch China very carefully, and it is a puzzle. But but I was impressed how they are doing that wealth redistribution, something that U.S. has not done to bring back its middle class. What Biden is doing with this infrastructure investment that does some redistribution of wealth and taxes the very rich.
It is a puzzle, but you raised all the key pieces of the puzzle, so it was very interesting to hear. Um, Unfortunately, I think we are running out of time. So, Professor Augusto would like to add something?
Sure.
Yes, thank you again, Professor Reza. I'm just curious. You have such a broad knowledge about human rights, and you brought several very good examples throughout the world. And I was thinking, uh, in Brazil has a lot of challenges also with regards uh, human rights and the wealth distribution that you just mentioned. So, would you have some experience, or have you studied some examples that you could share with us with regards to social development and sustainability? I ask that because I know that Biden has also used the new Green Deal approach for the economy. And Brazil, as you know, is a country that has a lot of potential in terms of sustainability and a bioeconomy. So I would like to hear your thoughts about that with regards to perhaps what uh, from your point and your experience, um, what could we do in Brazil, or what do you perceive as the next steps for a closer relationship between Brazil and the U.S. with regards to sustainability?
Very good question. You have to get rid of this president because he was denying that Amazon was burning. And I had in my last trip, I had arrived in Brazil after that. It's just amazing. Here you have the heart of the climate in Brazil, in the Amazon jungle. Either it was being plundered for for uh, for its timber, or or being burned. Um, I think, see, Brazil is so close to being a consolidated democracy. You have got, what is it? You have got you're the largest landmass in South America. I think you have the largest population as well, and I think also globally, in terms of the size of territory and population, you're in the top 10. It's a natural great power. Brazil was very much involved in non-aligned movement during the Cold War, if I'm correct, and the educational system, public education system that I've dealt with is just excellent, and you just need some leaders to emerge that who are going to be democratic, accountable, and also pay attention to science, and are sensitive to sustainability. These are, the goals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of, even China is, pretty much going along with achieving those goals. But a beautiful country like that, if it were sustainable, the ecotourism that you could have, the wise extraction policy that you could have of the resources that you have, it's tremendous. And I think you have the people power, the human capital there. It's just the leadership that has to change. And the leadership cannot change unless you have a kind of activated, mobilized civil society, that people join the political parties, mobilize, and they elect. They do not sit out the elections. And and our students learn about human rights and global citizenship, and they see that there is an important place for Brazil in the world, and they want to be a Brazilian students abroad who is respected from coming from a country that, if not second world, it is, you know, first world, and it is not made fun of for the president, I mean, but, you know, not for, you know, the people of Brazil or for the country, but, you know, sometimes New York Times had a series of articles, about 5 of them, that were on your president's administration. It's like you read them and you say, my God, what happened to competency? What happens to governance? What happened to accountability? What happened to respect for science? You know, it's a lot of whys. So my hope is that such a change would occur. I don't want to be a foreigner criticizing your government. I'm just going by, it's not opinion, it's going by facts and what I read. And if any of you are supporter of your government, please, you know, disagree with me or excuse, you know, my take on it if you disagree.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Professor Reza.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It has been such a nice conversation with you. I appreciate your attention. I'm greatly satisfied that you understood me. I didn't go too fast. So the PowerPoint is available to you. I'll send the other PowerPoint that I mentioned on human rights in Latin America. And I'm at your service, Augusto. Whenever you need me again, you know, please call on me. We'll be glad to share the material that we are developing. And when borders open, you'll see me in Brazil again.
Hopefully.
I miss that.
And be sure, we do share your hopes regarding the upcoming election, if the election happens. But thank you very, very much, Professor. I think it was extremely illustrative and a very rich presentation. I'm sure our students learned a lot. We actually received a lot of questions and messages saying that they were really enjoying your lecture and taking lots of notes. So that's a very good sign, especially because it's past 9 p.m. now. So it's getting harder and harder to keep our attention. And we still have almost 100 people watching us live. So that's a very good sign of how interesting and how easy to understand was your presentation. So thank you very much. I hope we can have you again with us and in person when the borders are open. It will be a pleasure.
I'm impressed by the professor. I'm impressed by the students, and my first calling is to be a professor, a teacher, administration. That is, you know, the second calling. You know, but you know, to teach, to interact, to learn from the students, that is invaluable. I thank you so much, and wish you a good night.
Thank you so much, Professor.